Now, we come to the fun part. Usually, when we talk about the future is out there. It is big, and it is into the future in time. And, my panelists here, Moon and Hui Li, I've asked them, to perhaps share in a certain sequence, what their thoughts are. I think you get to know them as much as I do later on. But what I like to do is to engage them, first of all, what's out there in the big scheme of things, at a macro level, in the industry, what are the emerging trends, the major dots that are emerging that they think will affect the future of work. And then we'll come down later on to the organization and to the individuals. So to kick off, maybe ask Moon, share with us, whether at night you do think about, 3 to 5 years into the future in the industry that you operate in, which is quite diverse now, not just telcos, but into other, including digital banking. So Moon, maybe over to you to say something about that.
Sure. Thank you, Chin Siong. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this Future of Work series. I think, first of all, I think the Minister and Sir James Dyson have also mentioned that, the world is changing very quickly. And the Minister have said that, you're getting our workforce to think about solving problems of the future, not today's problem, not yesterday's problem. I mean, unfortunately, we do not know what our problems is going to be there in the future. So what can we do? We are faced with disruptions every day, and every industry is being impacted. No one is spared. In the last 2.5 years, we have seen the acceleration of disruption, and a lot got to do with technology. And while I will not say, I do agree that the world needs more engineers, and by the way, I'm an engineer, but I don't think we can only have engineers in the world. I think the problems are going to be a lot more complex. We need actually people with all diverse skills and experience to come together to solve problems. So the world is going to change a lot faster. The workplace is going to change a lot faster. So that's certain. So that's the only thing I can tell you about the future. What I can also tell you is the people that we have today are actually not ready for the future. And that's where I think if you talk about the future of work, I can't define it, but it starts with how do we prepare our workforce for the future. I would approach it from saying we need people who are able not just to continuously learn, that's given, but to be open to looking at the future in a different lens. I think the biggest challenge is the mindset of the workforce. Are we able to position ourselves that I am not ready for the future? And every day or every night, what keeps me awake is our workforce ready for the future? Is our workforce prepared for the future? We'll see technology disrupting industries, and therein disrupt the workforce or the work jobs, the type of jobs that we come to appreciate. Even, traditional jobs, like in the accounting role, is evolving. And we know, back in school, parents will tell you, if you don't know what to do, just go and do a accounting degree and you'll never get out of a job. Because, every company needs an accountant, a finance person. But it's no longer the case. Yes, you do need finance-trained people, but at the ground level, I don't need human to balance my books anymore. I don't need a HR person to look at to look at hiring. I think Yulin mentioned that the role of a HR person have evolved to look at the well-being of the workforce, the attractiveness of the workplace. They're supposed to just purely hiring and replacing. So I think, in general, I would just say we are not ready for the future, and we need to get ourselves more ready for the future.
So perhaps I will start with work trends. So recently, Microsoft, we did our annual survey to more than 30,000 people across 30 countries. 3 trends that we see when you talk about future of work, especially post-COVID situations. We see 52% of the employees are prioritizing well-being. They are more looking at their health, versus work. Just want to kind of call that out because I think that's a very critical data point when we look at what does work mean, right, as we are going through this process. And the others 58%, interestingly, the second trend was the managers kind of felt that the leaders are very out of touch versus the employee expectation. I think that's another very interesting trend that we have to look at it because the future of work is very different pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. That kind of did very different reflections, right, for employees. The third one, because we did talk about workplace, right, is 38%, almost 4 out of 10 employees, they don't see a reason why they want to go back to the office, right? So a couple of trends we see. I think many of us heard about the Great Reshuffle, Great Resignation. Probably in Singapore we didn't see the Great Resignation, but the Great Reshuffle is people rethinking what does this work means for me, and people are starting to look at different alternatives, especially at the Zen millennials, Gen Z. We're seeing almost 80%, in the work trend saying that I want to change my job. So I think that's important because some of this data point, as we poll it, and it's quite interesting, consistent in Singapore context versus the global trend we are seeing when we kind of poll this across 31 markets, right? It becomes like the employee is looking at, is this worth it, right? So I would say when you look at future of work, hybrid work will stay, but it comes this point of what we call the hybrid work paradox. People want to work from home and have the flexibility, but yet they are thinking, hey, I miss the social connection. So if I look at many of us, right, when we look at organization, especially we have this talent pool, many people are looking at 2 things, right? What's the social capital? What's the knowledge capital? What does that mean? Social capital is more on the network. Because the work becomes not where you work now. It's who you work with, how do you work with people. So I want to call it out because I think the last 3 years have given us interesting trends for all of us as employers, organizations, to rethink how do you present work, how do you attract talents, because the way they look at it potentially in the past that's more financial is going to be very different, especially for our next generation talents. So I want to call it out because these 3 trends are very interesting that later we can talk about the innovations, how do you attract talents, but it gives you this whole kind of reflections of future of works about how people build the social capital. That's how the network you build, because that's where collaboration comes in. And we talk a lot about lifetime learning, right? That's knowledge capital. What's the skills? What's the new skills you build it? The skills become, as what we heard from Minister, the new currency for people to look at how you evolve work, what's your relevance, and more important, what's employability.
Thank you, Hui Li. Interesting. Some stats that you have there, and I like the part you talked about the hybrid paradox or the hybrid dilemma.
Right.
Right, and I think you talked about how is it that they want to work from home and then they want to have that social capital. If we extrapolate that forward, if you could consider, how does Microsoft see this, in terms of its workforce going forward? Do you see this kind of shaping the way how work will be done in Microsoft in future in a certain way? Would you
So-
describe that?
Right. I think interestingly for Microsoft, the hybrid works culture already happened pre-pandemic. So it's always been a culture. It's what our whole leadership kind of believe, right? So I think as we come into this pandemic, when many companies are forced to think that, hey, can I work remotely? I think a lot of demonstration is, yes, we could, because we have demonstrated like last 3 years we could. So I think in Microsoft, part of it is we have been in this journey. I think that's where we kind of drive a lot of our portfolio that's more on collaboration. So back to your point, what's different pre or post is like when Minister talks about it, when we look at talent, even if I look at Singapore or we have Asia Pacific that sits in Singapore, our talent doing the role here is not constrained by geography. In fact, I have so many colleagues that might be carrying Asia Pacific, Singapore title, but they are operating in Europe. They could be in India because they need to be with parents the last couple of years. And we see these evolutions become a norm. In the past, you might kind of feel, hey, I need to ask my manager's permission, can I do it? But now we are seeing it's so pervasive that it become a norm. You know, you can have a regional role here, but the person sits in Europe. And I think the case study that Mr. mentioned about collaboration, it need not be synchronous, that we are working together at the same time. Collaboration now has expanded. You can collaborate in different time zone. The collaboration of tools is possible that you can even collaborate in very different time zones without being physically together or being together in a meeting. I think that's the beauty of how it have evolved. And I would say in Microsoft, I see a lot of projects that if I need to bring a sustainability SME, it's so easy for me to reach out a UK colleague that's done it in an engineering company in UK to be involved in the project, and he or she doesn't even need to be here physically. The whole what we call the V-team concept in Microsoft is a norm. It's something that is not an exception. It's like, it's so pervasive that it's just part of the culture.
Go back to Moon. Okay, you know what you struck me is the workforce ready for the future, and you seem to have some doubt about that. So how do you cope with that, Moon? How do you deal with that?
Well, I think it's very interesting, before I get into how Singtel is getting our workforce ready or preparing ourselves better for the future, just to, pick up a point that Hui Li have mentioned in terms of the type of skills that you need in the new world where you are in collaboration, where you're in a hybrid environment. I think the 2 years of pandemic has taught us that we are not ready because even many of us, prior to the pandemic, how many of you are used to video conference using Teams, working? In that 2 years, I've to learn to not just use Teams, but set up a team interview with the media. Got to worry about sound. I'm a light technician, sound technician, figuring out how to equip yourself without any help at home, and to conduct an interview and to learn from it. So the type of skills that you need is ever changing, and everyone is forced into it. It doesn't matter whether you are the CEO or you are a non-technical person. In order for you to continue to operate, you have to learn. So I think if you really look at it, there will be never enough people out there that you can hire to be ready for your organization. So the only way to look at it is your existing workforce. There are only 1-2% of fresh grads in the workforce coming out. And with the current great resignation or the great reshuffle, we are looking at 15-20% annual attrition rate. How are you going to replace? Fast enough. There's no way. So which means to say we have to look inwards and say, how are we going to equip our people? So the way Singtel looks at it, first, I think 1 year ago, probably about just 1 year ago in October last year, we launched our group purpose. Empower every generation. It has a lot of meaning to different stakeholders. To our employees first, what does that mean? That means they are doing purposeful work. They are empowering generations of customers, communities, connecting people, providing services, providing solutions. To the engineers who've been building mobile network, they say, oh, this is another generation of mobile technology. From 2G to 3G to 4G, now I'm doing 5G. Empower the next generation of technology. To our customers, they say, wow, Singtel has provided connectivity to my parents, my grandparents, and now it is to me. And they're helping me to operate from home, with the fiber network, with the mobile network. To our IT services is a new solutions that we're looking at. So creating that North Star for the company is extremely important. It binds everybody together and say, I'm doing meaningful work. Regardless of whether I'm an engineer or I'm a sales staff, I'm a marketing person, I feel good that we have empowered different generations in different countries, in different societies, in different communities. So that's the first thing we did. The next thing we ask ourselves, how do you retain the workforce or encourage people to join you? There's a saying, right? Either you go big or you go home. So I like the word big. What does the big means? It's an acronym for B for belonging, I for impact, and G for growth. So I think if you build a workforce for the future, you need our people to have a sense of belonging, that they are part of the team. And that's why coming back to work is not an option, but it's necessary. Although we provide flexible way of working, but we do want people to come back to have a sense of belonging. They are part of a bigger community.
Thanks.
Impact. People want to do things that have created an impact for the community, an impact for myself, an impact for impact for society. And finally, G for growth. Growth at an organization level, at an individual level. What am I growing? How am I growing? How's the company growing? So I think if we are able to capture this in the hearts and minds of our people, and we position this well, you not only will you be able to attract the talent, the new workforce, as well as motivate and encourage your people to stay with you. So I think, in the new world, Hui Li just mentioned the Gen Z and the Gen Y, 60-80% of them thinking about changing their job. But I don't think it is only them. Everyone is asking, why am I doing this? What is this for? So I think we need to give them the reason beyond just showing up for work, collecting a paycheck, and going home, because that no longer motivates them. And I don't think they are people who are lazy, especially the Gen Y, Gen Z. They are highly motivated if you give them impactful work, meaningful work, and purposeful work. So I think we have to change. As leaders, we have to start to change our mindset and say, we have to change ourselves in order to accommodate this new workforce.
Thanks Moon, I'm going to bring it down now to the ground level. Because if you see the cameras there, we've got audience people who are future employees of Singtel, Microsoft, young people, they're watching with eagle-eyed, leaders. And I think somewhere at the back of their mind, they're wondering, what is the future of work like in Microsoft? By the time I get there, what can I expect? What would the future of job roles be like in Singtel? What would it be like? Hui Li, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so I want to touch on Moon's comment and point, because it resonates a lot in what we drive in Microsoft on purpose. So I think many of us, when we look at website mission, purpose, it might sound like, oh, it's so high level, but it's how do you bring this to life? So the common purpose, like in Microsoft, we talk about how do we empower, is the same choice of word, Moon, on empowering every person, every organization, how you can contribute to the planet. So it's so powerful that how do you translate? Back to your point, purposeful work, as what Moon mentioned, is how can you contribute? And when we attract talent, when I hire talent, it's not about the role you're hiring, it's about the possibility of how the individual can contribute into the organization, and the role can be a next role, a next role, and you might not even know which next role, because the possibility is there when you have the right mindset about how do you want to contribute. I think that's the, if you look at, if I were ask a person, what would you get, future of work is, you might start with this role, you might be in Singapore, but you never know, a couple of years later, you might be sitting somewhere in Redmond, our HQ. The possibility is a lot of roles evolve, because many of our roles actually even evolve annually. It's like you might be doing this, but next year it might change. But I think that's the excitement of the possibility of a lot of transformation that we are driving, that we need to be very adaptive to as Microsoft, how we kind of plan to attract the right talent that you don't want to, you want them to stay and retain and feel they're part of organizations. And I think that's where they will see their career growth coming in, because they believe in the purpose. I think that's what I focus a lot in the culture in Singapore. Like, hey, when you mentioned about, we talk about being digital resilient in Singapore, what can we do in your day role that can contribute to your industry, to your clients, to the project you do? It's not just for revenue growth in P&L, but people feel proud, like say, hey, I did this transformation for this company on sustainability, I helped carbon emission reduction, and people feel proud because it's, hey, it's a demonstration of me contributing, even in small part, to the broader problem statement. I think it's given them that that goal, right, that people keep wanting to do more.
Would you say, Hui Li, that, the job role of future, I mean, really the future of work really is about playing multiple roles or being involved in multiple, aspects of what the organization's initiatives are? Would that be an accurate reflection of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think gone are the days, especially in tech company or when we want to drive innovation. Because, kind of dreaming of what are the possibilities, not what I'm just doing a manual work, check in, check out. And if you have that mindset that I can do beyond the role, I think that's what Microsoft, we drive, and I think it ties back to your point when you say grounded. I feel it's not just mindset of individual and the leaders, but the culture you bring to the organization to drive this pervasively. So the culture of, hey, I'm not, so in Microsoft, we kind of measure people, or what we call the 3 circles of impact, right? Well, how do you impact your own role? Obviously, you need to do your own role well. How do you impact your team? They could be within the same kind of functions, organization, region. And the third one, and more importantly, back to the comment impact, how do you make others successful? So when we measure our performance on individual this way, they no longer, we're not recognizing the contribution just on doing the job well. It's how do you make your team and others successful, and in the process, you get the multiplier effect. Roles evolved that the individual getting involved actually open more doors for he or herself to find different roles outside the organization. So it has to have that culture and the performance management system that encourage that kind of mindset. And then that's where the future of work, back to what you mentioned in Microsoft, we don't look at, hey, that's just your job. It's what we call the 3 circles of influence. How do you make impact on others, yourself, and for everybody?
So, Moon, how would you describe what the future of work looks like in Singtel?
I think, first of all, Singtel is a very big organization, at least in the local context. In total, we have 25,000 employees. So this is not just for new people who intend to join Singtel, but also for existing employees who are with us. I think the work will always be changing. We always want our people to be good at what they do, to be the best that they can be in their current role. You need to be proud of what you do. You need to be good at it. not just locally, but globally. So in order for you to be good, you need to be at the top of your skills and industry. So we want to provide you the environment that you can be that top 5% of that industry or in that function that you're operating in. So I think in order to do that, we will provide you in the environment. So I think there are 4 things that we'll focus on. Firstly, I think in the area of personal excellence. How do you achieve that? And I'm not talking about just professional area as in, if you're an engineer, you want to be good like the Dyson engineer or any engineers, but also general well-being in terms of your mental health well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being. We encourage you to be good, to treat yourself well, that you can go all the way and not be bogged down with other issues in your life. So personal excellence is important. There's one area we'll provide the environment and the support for you. The second area is about tech acceleration. I mean, with 5G, AI, cloud, automation, I'm just naming a few that is all facing us. Are you ready? Are the people ready? And to that end, we partner with SkillsFuture, IMDA. Internally, we've trained 900 of our employees to understand what is 5G. What's the future like with 5G, with supporting the industries? Not just on a consumer, faster phone, better download, but how can it transform other industries? And tech acceleration doesn't mean only to the engineers. To the non-engineers, you have to upgrade yourself to understand and appreciate how technology is impacting your role, impacting your job. I mentioned about the accountant, also the marketing, in recruitment, in almost every aspect of it. Technology is part and parcel of it, and how are you ready? So the second area is tech acceleration. The third area is future ready. What do I mean by future ready? Don't get attached to your current job because it may no longer be valid tomorrow. It may be obsolete, in 6 months' time or in a year's time. So we provide, again, our people a chance to do a professional conversion course. We work with the union, CTC, Company Training Committee to convert jobs, to retrain our people. So in the last 3 years, we have changed 1,200 of our employees from one role to another role. What they used to do is no longer available. The job has become obsolete. So we move them to another job. 1,200 in the last 3 years, we continue to do that. So that's being future ready. And finally, the last area, the fourth area, is about leadership. And the leaders of today or tomorrow will be very different from the leaders of yesterday. The workforce is not going to just say yes to the boss. They're going to ask you why, not asking you the what and the how. So they're asking you, why am I doing this? Why are you asking me? Why are we pursuing this? So if we do not know how to answer the why and only know how to tell them the what and the how, we are in trouble. No one's going to follow you. So I think we need to get our leaders ready, especially when you're managing a younger workforce. I think it is not them that we try to change. It is us leaders that we have to change to adopt them. I'll give you an example of how I've changed. I've been an executive sponsor for a Singtel Management Associate Program for the last 12 years. It's a very elaborate process. We pick graduates from universities, and every year there are about 2,000 applicants, and we finally pick about 50 or 80 of them to join us. There was probably 3-4 years ago, a final round of interview, a panel interview that I came in, and we go through the normal interview, but finally we make an offer. about half accepted our offer. I mean, from 2,000 down to 50, only half accepted our offer. I said, what happened? So then we do a post-mortem and we check what happened. Well, each one of them, because they are really good and work in Singapore is in abundance, they have 3 or 4 job offers on hand. Why would they join us? So I told the team, I said, well, let's change. Next year, the final interview is not an interview. And when they came in the panel, I said, guys, congratulations, you've all been hired. You are here to interview me, whether you want to join Singtel. Once I did that, the acceptance rates have gone up, back to 80, 90%. So what has changed? Nothing has changed. The process is still the same. I've gotten 30% more acceptance rate just because the leaders have changed the mindset. Just reframing. So it is 2 ways rather than 1 way. We're putting a job on offer. They are also looking at us and say, is this the organization I'm going to work for? So I think it is important for leaders to start changing the mindset. What I used to work, how my leaders or my bosses have treated me, managed me, I can say it's no longer relevant. We have to start to think about how to engage the new generation of workforce. It doesn't just mean that the millennials, the Gen Z are the ones. In fact, the existing workforce, the Gen X, the baby boomers are reassessing and say, why do I work? So they need to feel that my boss is now looking after me, not just for work, but as an individual. So
Right.
this is something that the 4 things that we'll focus on: personal excellence, tech acceleration, future ready, and leadership development. So if you join Singtel, welcome to the party.
Thank you, Moon, and very interesting and inspiring sharing. Can I interview you next time? Yeah, it's very interesting. You seem to allude that the future of work is going to, not just a future, but how we attract talent in the future. It's not about telling them the what and how, but you got to explain the why and the purpose of the company and what it does. I suppose you see this as going to continue, that the future generations of people are going to look at a company's purpose as a determinant. So now I'm going to come to another question related to that. Is your leadership team, how do they do that? I'm looking at the question on Slido here, and it struck me because the question is, how do you see the future of C-suite leaders, which is kind of the C-1, or okay, maybe your direct reports. Those are going to help you execute to your strategy. How do you see the future of C-suite leaders in a future that is driven by agile, a lot of transformation, talent networks, and how is it going to affect the kind of C-suite that you're going to put together in the future? Hui Li, you want to share that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off with when you talk about leadership, whether it's 1 minus now or any level of leadership, and I think Moon touched a couple of it. I would say we talk about D&I, right? Diversity and inclusion, and it's not just gender. Having leaders that's able to embrace differences, I think that's very critical, especially when we talk about getting into innovations. Different people might have a very different point of view. So having leaders that really embrace diversity and inclusion. More inclusion part, I think, is a tougher one, because inclusivity, sometimes people might resonate with people you're more comfortable with, more of people that's kind of your same profile. And I think probably in MNC like Microsoft, we had the opportunity to work with people from different age group, different demographics, or maybe not even from a tech industry, right? So it's how do you bring the best of all this different diversity and make the best out of it? And when you touch on it, right, I think the world has moved from, hey, that's why we don't want managers, we want leaders. And to be honest, I see leadership where it's not because you have a title, you can be leader. I always tell my team, if you are running a project, you can lead without a title, because that's where you bring forth your ability to bring people along. So when I look at leaders, whether it's one down or even people are higher, I do spend myself personally interviewing a lot of talent, not for that role, but finding the right attributes and leadership qualities that you want to bring the person in, because he or she is going to help groom and, will excel in the culture. So I think that's important. And I think we have done things like I've told my leaders, reverse mentoring, right? We always say, hey, we must mentor somebody. And it's like, is it always the more aged person must mentor the younger ones? I think I've in cases, get the young ones to mentor the more experienced one, because even like myself, maybe in a tech company, some of the young folks that join, they just have very out-of-the-box thinking. They might question you things like, why are you doing things this way? Rather than shutting them off, you give an ability to kind of raise being very inquisitive, challenging the status quo, like, all these processes, why do you do it this way, right? So I think that kind of perspective of being very open is very critical, because that's where you bring the best out of the talent. People want to come in to contribute, they don't want to be told. So we need to have leaders that have this open, or what we call growth mindset. You're always open on what might even challenge the status quo, right? And be very inclusive, because you should not have, hey, I don't like your idea, let's go with mine, right? I think gone are the days, since we talk about future of work, that leaders and managers have to really change their framework, because it's a bit on, hey, we're all together. And obviously the one that I'm really focusing on, especially in MNC, is I have people telling me, hey, I need to be in a startup to drive innovation. And many of the Gen Z will say, oh, I don't want to join the tech company now. I want to go startup. It's more exciting. Things are evolving. They can change, right? And I'll tell them, no. Actually, you can be a startup in a MNC like Microsoft, because we're very open for you to drive changes and allow people to fail and make mistakes. Because I think a lot of people might not try because they're so worried, if I make a mistake, does that mean I lose my job? Or if I do something wrong, does my managers or my leaders think I'm wrong? I think those are the attitudes of how we measure our employees or our team members. That's very critical. Then you will attract great talents, because people want to join where they can contribute and not be told what to do and just follow my instructions.
Thank you. Hui Li. Moon, you have any comments on that?
Well, I guess, C-suite or leaders, especially C-suites, first of all, the most important thing is to walk the talk. If you talk about lifelong learning, continuous learning, what are we doing at a senior position? Are we just saying, this applies to all of you except me? I think I've got my first report, my C-suite, who are in totally different function, non-technical function, taking up a coding course just to experience what is it all about. So I think people have to start to show that leaders are willing to change and learn and walk the talk. There's no better way of telling the organization that no one is spared. In the disruptive world, everyone is impacted. And by showing the leadership and saying, I'm in it together with you, is the best way to send a signal to say, we all have to do this together. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is really about learning how to lead. I don't think, many of us, some are born leaders. It is a skill that you need to learn. And sometimes we're blindsided because we've been promoted over the years, that we hit a stage where you become the boss and you think that, oh, I know all and I don't have to change. So the other thing that I encourage my whole entire C-suite, my management committee, is to do a 360 evaluation and start to see how others see you. Not just your boss. Most C-suite, I can tell you, I don't know, from my experience, I only work in one company, so I can tell you. that one company is when you look at it, in order to get to a senior position, you always have got pretty good assessment when you come to 360 from your boss. That's generally the case. Otherwise, you probably won't be promoted to that level. But when you start to do it, you realize that your peers may not see it the same way as your boss, and your subordinates even further. So what do you do when you start to see it, do it for the first time? I've come across in the past, leaders who refuse to do 360. And why? Because it's a mindset. I've gone so far, I don't need it. I don't want to go further, so why should I do it? So it's no longer a choice, I'm saying, because individuals, especially C-suite's behavior, affects the rest of the organization. The way you behave, the tone you set, becomes the culture of the company. So that's the second thing. Really be reflective of your own leadership and ask yourself, is that something that I put myself to change? And thirdly, as leaders, do not put your staff on corporate jail. And especially in this environment where we are seeing great attrition, great resignation. I give you an example when I say that. Singtel included, I have to confess, and we are changing. How many of the organizations have got a policy that you do not allow your employees to rotate internally before they hit certain years or months in their current job? Many of us have 1 year, 2 years. You say, I will not allow you to transfer until you do that, right? But then I say conversely, when you hire a new person, do you look at the CV and say, hey, the person is less than a year, why am I hiring him or her? So there's a disjoint in your policy. Internal, you say you can't move. External, you're willing to take somebody with less than a year in their job. Why the discrepancy? Because this policy was set many years ago. That during that time, there wasn't so much of a rotation, and most people will say, I will not hire someone who's less than 2 years on the job, because you consider them job hopper. Now you say, no, the person have got very diverse experience. I want him or her. So do we put our own people at a disadvantage? And worse still, do we put our people at a disadvantage by saying, oh, it's an internal transfer. You need to stay 6 months before you can move. That's another common policy. But if I resign, you probably have me for 1 month. So I think, again, leaders start to think and challenge and say, what are the rules that we have to change internally? Are we putting our people in corporate jail just because we think that they are captive? It's no longer the case. We need to look at employees all the same. Potential employee, existing employee, treat them fairly. And I think once we start to have that mindset change, your people will have a better sense of belonging. Hey, the company is treating me better. They are not favoring external versus internal. Everyone is giving equal opportunity. And I must admit, we are not there yet. That's something that we are changing. But the organization have to change. Leaders have to accept it. So, 3 things.
Thank you. This question from Andy Sim, which is, and he says, the future of work is about why we work as much as how we work. Today, we are more ready for the latter than the former. What do we need to do as a whole to make this shift?
Yeah, so thanks, Sandy, for the question. I think it goes back that we talk about purposeful work, right? Why are we working? Obviously, we need to work because we need to pay our flats and bills for sure. That's kind of the basic, right? But how do you enjoy work? I think the why is so important. I think that's where, coming back to the conversation, people can make impact if they feel they can make meaningful contribution. So it's how we drive that connection of how they can contribute back to the bigger purpose, right? That their little part, I think I've many team members like say, hey, I'm too junior, I can't make great impact. And the answer is no. All of us make small impact. It's just how we help them relate what they can do that brings, to the ultimate. Just interestingly, Microsoft yesterday, we did our global hackathon. And I did a kickoff with the Singapore Asia Pacific base, and it was exciting to see 14 teams or, many people come together, and not all of them have tech backgrounds, right? In Microsoft, we have my CHRO, my business partner, actually drive Power Platform as she can do low code herself, right? So people want to come together because the hackathon was something that we just want people to brainstorm what problem you want to solve, right? And what can I do? And if this solution's won, how can we bring this to market? So back to your point, it's not just the role and the attributes, but making them kind of connect that, the little things I do in my capacity, it actually drives the broader benefits, and each of us has a part. And I think that's the why part, that people wake up and show up at work because you don't drag your feet. Hey, I need to work because I need to get my next paycheck, right? I don't think it's just the millennials like what you mentioned. I think many of us, right, having worked so many years, especially during this COVID and we stopped traveling, or, you did a reflection like, hey, at least for me, I did ask myself like, hey, you've been traveling all this while. Monday, Friday comes back, go long haul, take a long flight. If you take a reflection back, what did I achieve? Not just on meeting certain financial P&L, like how do I contribute back? So coming back to, hey, how do I contribute to a community? How do I contribute by a team? I think it's having that connection that people say, hey, I want to do this because I'm in it, not because I've been told or I need a financial. So it's giving that purpose. And more importantly, I tell my leaders, how do you celebrate small success? Sometimes we do a lot of win wires, right? Many ones for very big opportunities, there's multi-billion opportunities and deal. How do we celebrate small success that people feel they are appreciated, that they are part of it is being contributed, and hey, it's not just the big ones that people make the biggest wins that get recognized, but we celebrate small success that people feel, hey, I'm in a journey. I am part of this team that can achieve the ultimate goal. I think it's so critical from that perspective on the why part.
Thank you. Moon, a quick response from you.
Sure. I think, very good questions. That's why we embark on a purpose for the organization, empower every generation. And we are now activating the entire, 20,000 employees. So far, we have probably covered about 40% of them. But then to internalize it, what does that mean in my job as a technician, in my job as an agent, a sales rep? When I say empower every generation, the company have this purpose, how do I reflect it and internalize my job? What does that mean? I mean, it is very clear that in the last 2 years of pandemic, even in Singapore and everywhere, in every market that we operate in, communication, connectivity has been a major part of our life. Without the fiber to your home, how could you operate from home? Without the fiber to the home, how can students study from home? Without fiber to the hospitals, how do you ensure that things are working? During the pandemic, at the height of it, we lay fiber to the dormitories with our technicians all with full PPE equipment going in. Our salespeople bringing the prepaid cards there to sell. So there's a real meaning to the work we do to support the community, support the country, and in every country that we operate in. So I think people start to appreciate that our job is not just to show up and work, but there's a deeper meaning to it. And I think when people realizes it, the effect is strong. And people feel a lot more engaged with the organization and feel a sense of belonging.
Thank you. I'm looking at one of the go beyonds that Minister Chan Chun Sing has mentioned just now. And then I'm going to put this pointer question to you both as industry leaders. because we have a future of work and we're going to have a future of learning panel later on, and this is going to lead right to it. So Mr. Chan has said the 3 go beyonds. I would say the last go beyond, he says that learning institutions must go beyond just producing degrees, that they must partner with industry, that they must customize modules with industry. As an industry leader, if anything were possible, what would you hope learning institutions can do to partner with you to achieve the future aspirations of your organizations? What would you want the learning institution to be able to do to help you with the future of work?
So maybe I start off, I think I part the question. I just want to highlight, since we talk about future of work and later the panel will talk about learning. So for us in our culture, learning is part of the work, right? Learning is, for example, we have our learning days. Every month we park aside in Microsoft that we just have everyone learning from all levels up. And you can learn different curriculums, you can learn anything. We want people to dedicate time to learn, because sometimes going to work is very tough. People are like, hey, if I learn, does that mean I'm not productive, I'm not selling, I'm not doing certain things? We actually park that as part of culture, because in all the way from Satya, I really love this part of the culture, especially in tech company, many of us will know, because we're driving innovation, is about, he calls it, you don't need to know it all, but you need to learn it all. I think it's such a powerful phrase, that you need to give that areas that people need to know is okay not to know, right? And I think that's so critical, especially at leaders, that we should not pretend we know everything, because that's where you allow a lot of different ideas to come about, because that's where you learn. So I want to call that out, because it becomes part of, hey, you need to learn, because that's just part of your job. There's something that's going to be new, right? Like, for example, we did the augmented reality, HoloLens. Those are very new technology, quantum computing. You can't be saying today what I learned, the future I will know, right? So coming back, what's the role of institution? I think it's less on the curriculum of whatever you study might not be relevant in 10 years. I always feel what is so critical, and I was just talking to Yulin just now, is critical thinking, right? I think a lot of this is what institution can impart with folks with a very growth mindset. He or she is always prepared to say, I'm okay not to know, but I will learn it. Critical thinking, and analytical thinking, problem solving. To me, those are life skills that we want them to learn in their foundation years, because you will go into corporate that there's no curriculum, and you might navigate into situations into unknown. Is how all these core skills come in to help you navigate and be successful. So I think that's very important. So that critical thinking, analytical, is what I would love our education system and institution to help drive all this talent, because once they have the growth mindset, when they go in, they can learn anything. And that's where we call skills as a currency, because these skills could be something else 5 years from now. It could be 10 years from now. We don't even know what is coming.
Okay.
So I think that's very critical. The third one I want to touch on is if you look at what Microsoft, we believe in ecosystem. I think the power of learning is you don't need to do this yourself. You don't need to be, hey, it's invented here syndrome, versus how do we bring ecosystem. Like for us on our Cloud Azure platform, it's about working with ISVs. There are very small startup fintechs, edutechs, or healthcare tech. They have the solution. Is how do we collaborate with them to take their IPs to enhance it, and the sum of all parts might create new IPs. So I think again, learning sometimes is not, do I have to build it myself, but how do I leverage the ecosystem, because that's where the multiplier comes in. Yeah.
Thank you. Moon?
Well, unfortunately, not every company has the resource of Dyson to start your own university, and perhaps not necessary as well in Singapore. I think firstly, we should take the advice from the minister, and instead of calling them IHL, to call ILL, right? I think there's a role for the institution of lifelong learnings to be more receptive to open partnerships with industry. I think that is key, because if they are positioning themselves as institute of higher learning, they want to protect that and retain that, and not look at a different model of providing the right skills and capabilities for the future workforce. But if they start to change the name of ILLL, they would embrace the partners, as in industry, the players and different sectors and different companies, and say, let's work towards getting your workforce ready for the future, so that we do not have to end up like Dyson creating our own university. I don't think it's necessary. We can do a much better job in partnering ILLs to come up with the programs that's relevant for today's work and potentially for tomorrow's work. Getting our people ready. So it's a mindset shift. We are already partnering with SIM to think about that. How do we get our workforce ready and certified and qualified on a modular basis, to give the individual a sense of growth, that I'm progressing, I'm learning something that is portable. Not just when they are with Singtel, even if they leave Singtel, they have a skill that is relevant, that they can continue to use and to add on to their future employer and workforce. So getting that shift in mindset is paramount, and I think I should be, also appealing to other companies like Microsoft, and we could actually co-support a program that is on Azure Cloud, that my workforce can get certified together with an ILL. And that is something that is relevant, not just for the company, but for the industry. Because as a whole, there are not enough engineers. There are not enough skills in many areas, and only through this, we are then going back to the workforce to tap into the current workforce, that 2.5 million people that Minister Chan have talked about, to get them ready for the future.
Thank you.
I want to add on a point, because I think it's great Moon raised. For example, in Microsoft, we work with NUHS, NUS on the School of Medicine to do hologram, where we want to help the doctors across different countries look at some of the procedural. So it's for work, it's also for learning, across with augmented reality. And obviously, back to your point, Moon, on partnership, in some of this use case, when it gets to very high 5G latency, this is a very good use case. I just want to share, it's a kind of a collaboration, some private sector in a telco that you provide the 5G. And then obviously in this case, it's a doctor. How they kind of drive this with the HoloLens of augmented reality to make this to life without them physically having to fly to another country to do the surgery. So this example, back to your point about collaboration, institutions, private sectors, even cross-industry. The world has now get so blurred that it's not, hey, you're in telco, you're telco. Actually, telco is in healthcare. We are from cloud side. We're also involved in healthcare solutions. That this is kind of an interesting augmentation of how the team can come together to solve a healthcare problem.
Good. After this, we'll have a Singtel Microsoft Digital University for the healthcare industry. We'll set it up. We have a bit more time. And I'm looking at the questions, but I want to use this time really to ask Moon, really after the whole conversation, there's a question here in Slido that asks the other side, The future of work seems to be talking a fair bit of the potentials out in the future. The question is, are there any detriments, dangers, that could emerge in the future of work?
I would say the future of work will evolve, right? Obviously, when you talk about technology is enabler, it will evolve. Like for now, if you look at this phase, we talk about it, the work where we had the place now in our today's world become irrelevant. Not that it's 100% irrelevant, it become less critical versus how do we build the work when you define, as in, I don't need to be in this place to do some job. So I'm more positive rather than thinking of detriment, because I feel the possibility of technology has evolved that the work definition is so broad, is how you want to define it, versus we're confined to say, is it more a physical location? Is work means I can be just doing for Singapore region? Honestly, when I look at talents, a lot of talents and work, I no longer see, do I need to hire people from Singapore to even do some of the work here? Because the world become very broad. And back to your point, ironically, I was just having a conversations with my team. I say in the past, people always go for FTE job. People want full-time employee job. People get nervous if they get contracting job because they feel that's not certain. Ironically, I'm seeing a group of talents coming in and say, I don't want FTE job. On the contrary, because I want more of a contract, because it gives me the flexibility, and I need not work for one. I can work for multiple, because I'm kind of marketing my skills on deliverables. It's not, no longer are we in the old days of era to say job is about 9 to 5, clocking in and going out, right? How many meetings do you attend? I see work going, which is what we're trying to evolve, is if it becomes so outcome-based that think of work becomes so borderless, maybe people might not just want to work for one company, so-called. They're selling their capability that can be global, can be virtual. So I'm just more looking at the possibility, on the possibility, because technology has created that, and a lot of people, back to your point, whether a purpose, I think, especially in Singapore, I think we are in that situation that some of our next generation might work not because they want to take the material gains that they say, is it a bigger house or bigger car, is how do I fulfill, how do I have more experiential, that I do something, I experience and travel and come back and work. So that definition of future of work has evolved because it's not the traditional definition many of us has lived with, right? That, hey, is it job hopping? Is it doing the same job for them or for the next generation future of work? The possibility of technology and the innovations, I would say it will fundamentally could change how work get defined, because it's not about employment, right? It could be, I'm just kind of marketing my capability and skills. So not answering your question, I'm more bullish and positive because I feel the world is so exciting that it could evolve, not from the current definition of work.
Thank you. Moon?
Yeah. Thank you, Hui Li, for taking up more time so that I can spend lesser time. So there are three risks, but before I cite them, I think firstly, there is no regrets from any organization to continue to invest in its workforce. So that is given. So I don't see any risk, even to the extent that you invest in them, they leave. Because when they leave, they may be pursuing other aspirations, priorities, but they still leave with a good feeling of the organization have actually prepared them well for the future. So I think there's no risk in investing in your people. The three, I would say that, I won't say detriment, but I'll say risk. First is the price of inaction and slow action. So if organizations are not changing and thinking that what gets me here is going to get me there in the future, I think that's not going to work. So that's the first risk. The second risk is actually IHL not wanting to be ILL. And then Singapore will lose its relevance to be a place that can attract companies like Dyson to position themselves here because our workforce is not good enough. 3, leaders' mindset. If leaders, again, are thinking, why should we change or it's too fast, then we are not taking advantage of the size of Singapore, which is small, and we need to take advantage of being small. Singtel can claim to be the first 5G standalone network in the world that have nationwide coverage because we are small. So play to our advantage. If we move fast in the area of getting our workforce ready for the future, we will continue to lead and attract companies to work with us to attract our talent. Our people will be very valuable. So I think 3 risks or 3 dangers if we don't take this seriously.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moon. Thank you very much. Really appreciate 2 of you spending the time and your very generous sharing of your insights and your experience. So can we put our hands together and thank our 2 panelists, Moon and Hui Li. Thank you very much.